Thank you, Chairman Jackson and subcommittee members. My name's Mike Powell. I am the Director of the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability. Just to be clear, I'm not a consultant. I don't work for DJS. I work for you. I'm in the Department of Legislative Services and one of the many nonpartisan, independent, objective staff there. We were directed by the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee to do a performance evaluation of the Department of Juvenile Services, and that's what I'm here to present to you today. And after this presentation, I'm happy to take any questions that you have. So when we were directed to do this, we talked to a number of stakeholders, and based on those conversations, we chose to focus on the kids that are what I would call DJS involved, but that are living in the community. So they're not living in a juvenile correctional facility or a detention center, but they're, for the most part, at home. And that is thousands of kids at any given time, whereas as far as kids in facilities, you're talking about hundreds of kids at any given time. And what we wanted to understand was how effective some of the services that those kids in the community are getting are. And we wanted to know how DJS oversees and holds accountable those community services providers. Then we also chose to look at what are called SINS referrals. Those are children in need of supervision, and I'll talk about that in some more detail later. Then finally, when we started doing this, it came to my attention that a number of young people had been indicted for some serious violent incidents, and I wanted to understand the history of those kids' involvement, if there had been any, with the Department of Juvenile Services. So that's what I'm going to cover today. But our first chapter in this report talked about sort of the long-term trends in juvenile justice, which I thought was important to just sort of orient ourselves. And this slide that you can see in front of you shows the number of referrals to the Department of Juvenile Services going back to 2010. And a kid can be referred by a variety of sources and for a variety of reasons, but most often they're referred to by a police officer because they've been charged with a crime. And as you can see, there was a long-term sort of decline in those referrals. And then during the COVID pandemic, those referrals cratered essentially and have been slowly rising since maybe the beginning of 2022. I want to point out that I said referrals. Sometimes people would call those intakes, and sometimes people call them complaints. They all generally mean the same thing. And so if I use different words, I'm generally talking about the same thing. A kid is being brought to DJS. I also want to point out that referrals are not necessarily the same thing as a crime. Kids can be referred for reasons that aren't necessarily criminal. The second of these three sort of orientation slides shows something. Oh, let me back up for a second and say kids being referred to DJS is not something that DJS has a lot of control over. They don't make a decision on whether somebody is brought to them or not for the most part. This slide shows something that they do have some influence over, and that is the decision they make with what to do with a kid who's brought to them. And essentially, a kid who comes to DJS can do one of three things with them. One is they can resolve it at intake, and that essentially says that this matter is closed and that kid goes home. There's a record of it, but that's the end of DJS's involvement with that kid. The second I'll talk about is what's called formaled, and that means they're referred to the state's attorney's office in that jurisdiction for prosecution. And then the third thing is what's called informaled, sometimes called pre-court supervision. So that's where they might say to a kid, in lieu of forwarding this to the state's attorney's office, we want you to attend school, stay out of trouble, don't reoffend for the next 6 months. And if you do all that, maybe participate in a program that we have for you. And if you do those things in 6 months, we'll consider this matter closed. Otherwise, we sort of reserve the right to change our minds and formal this. And as you can see, so the green line is the number of cases, percentage of cases that are closed at intake. And that used to be much higher, or sorry, the green one is the number of cases, percentage of cases that are formaled and sent to the state's attorney's office. That used to be over 50% of the referrals to DJS. That also did a long decline until around the pandemic when it was under 40%. And that took a bit of a dive during the pandemic and has sort of climbed since then. And the blue line, if you can see it, is almost the reverse, like mirror image of that, which is the kids where their cases are resolved at intake. So for a long time, that was not quite as many as the ones that were referred to the state's attorney's office, but that number grew for a long time and has since started to decline. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'm confused.
Yep.
So who is making this decision?
DJS is.
And they get to DJS from the police generally, but can get to them from somebody else?
Correct. 90+%
I just want to
of the
clarify.
time they come
I
there
understand.
from the
Thank
police. And I'll talk a little bit about the latitude they have in making these decisions when I get to it. And I do want to point out that orange line, which is at the bottom, is the number of kids who are informal. So they're given the pre-court supervision that I discussed earlier. And it's hard to see because it's a smaller portion of all of these decisions, but that has been cut by about half over the last decade or so. Last one to sort of orient us. So we can talk more about the juvenile justice process, but kids who are referred to the state's attorney's office, some of them, not all of them, not even a majority of them, but they will end up before a judge and that case will be adjudicated. And some of those kids are adjudicated delinquent. Essentially in the adult system, that's the equivalent of being found guilty. And a judge has two options with a kid who's been adjudicated delinquent. One is to give them probation, and the other is to commit them to a juvenile detention center, a juvenile facility. And for the longest time, about 70% of kids would get probation and the other 30% would be committed. And there was a weird anomaly during the pandemic, which I think I could explain if asked. But recently, the number of kids who get probation instead of being committed is 80%, which is the highest it's been in the time period that we looked at, which is over 10 years. This is another one where DJS is not involved in this decision. It's a decision made by a juvenile judge or a juvenile magistrate. I'm going to move on to the kids who are being, who are DJS involved, but they're living in the community. And if they're being treated by, if they're getting some sort of help, almost all of that help is given to them by a contractual provider. I'll call them contractual community-based providers. So DJS employees are not working with kids in the neighborhood where they live. It's contractual companies, firms, nonprofits that DJS asked to do this work. And for this chapter, which is chapter 2 in the report, we wanted to focus on those kids who are being treated in the community. And what we really wanted to know is, do those services work? And those services are primarily composed of mentoring and therapy. We did some analysis, and the next couple of slides are based on analysis of a group of kids who had been charged with second-degree assault. That was the most serious offense that they had been charged with. And one of the things we wanted to...
Yes, no problem.
It is usually like a fight where somebody is hurt, but they're not hurt badly, and a weapon wasn't used. Okay, did I get that right?
So yeah, as you moved through, you know, if you could just be aware that some members will be asking.
Please.
Or will be.
Please, no, please do.
No, it's not about sophistication. It's just about exposure. That's all. It's about exposure. Some have been exposed to this more than others.
Different policy.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So.
Also a misdemeanor.
It's a misdemeanor, okay.
Yes.
So for a kid who comes to DJS for a second-degree assault charge, and it's the first time they've ever been brought to DJS, 77% of the time that case is resolved at intake, and just 10% of the time is that case formaled and referred to the state's attorney's office. I think it's logical that if a kid comes in for a second-degree assault, but it's their third or fourth or fifth time that they've been brought to DJS for any reason, that only 54% of them are resolved at intake, and 35% of them are formaled and referred to the state's attorney's office. Those decisions that are made, and they're made at a local level about, do we resolve this at intake, do we informal it, or do we refer it to the state's attorney's office? They vary widely by jurisdiction. So you can see on here, Montgomery County is much more likely to informal, that's the purple bar in the middle, these second-degree assault cases than Charles County. And some of that, so again, these are all kids being brought in for the same reason legally. But based on what jurisdiction they are in, there's different likelihoods that they might get some of these informal services, or that it would be resolved at intake, or that it would be sent to the state's attorney's office.
Yes,
Please.
no problem. No
Up
problem.
here. And these decisions are being made by DJS.
They're made by DJS, but there are some, they have discretion in some cases, but in some cases they must formal something by law. In some cases, they are not allowed to formal something by law. So they have
Okay,
discretion.
they've arranged.
Yeah,
I got that, but this huge difference between jurisdictions
it is a
suggests.
huge difference.
Oh, yeah.
Are you going to explain what that is, where that comes from?
I mean, some of it is, and Montgomery County would tell you this, like they have more resources in their community to refer kids to. But I am not the expert on why this gap is as big as it is.
And I will also say, just from a little bit of experience, that some jurisdictions have a lower level of tolerance than others, wanting to send the message. So I represent 3 of those that are on there, but I've, been around the entire state, so. Yeah.
Those are both, I think, good reasons. I think there's also, well, I think we'll get to this in a little bit, which is that sometimes kids, we're like, go do the Boys and Girls Club, and we're resolving it at intake, so they've sort of got some sort of services, but there's not sort of an official
Yep, absolutely.
record of it. I got
But
ahead of my
again, I'm
notes.
sorry, just to be clear,
Yeah.
but these are decisions not being made by the jurisdiction, they're being made by DGS who are
Yeah,
in the
sorry.
jurisdiction.
It's made by the local DJS
That's office.
office that serves that jurisdiction. In some cases, a county has their own. In some cases, I think on the Eastern Shore, and maybe in other parts, there's a couple counties sort of have a joint office.
Okay, maybe if the director, when he comes up here,
Yes.
could address that issue, because it's stunning to me, and I really want to understand it, so thank you.
Sure. So in addition to what the law says you're allowed to do, as far as an intake decision, they have a tool that they use. It's called the Intake Decision Tool, or IDT, that is based on research and is supposed to say, based on what we know about this kid, what they've been charged with, and all these different things, like this is the recommended course of action to take with this kid. And we looked at a sample of these second-degree assault cases, and what we found is that the recommendation of the tool is only followed in 48% of those cases. 52% of those cases. So in almost half the time, the decision that DJS makes is not the decision that's recommended by the tool. Again, in some cases, that may be because the law requires them to, say, formal a case, whereas the tool might say you should resolve this at intake. But we thought it was important to share that information with you. So the kids, these second-degree assault kids that get informal, so again, they are asked to not reoffend, attend school, maybe work if that's relevant, but potentially be involved with one of these services in the community. We only saw records that 30% of those kids had been referred to one of those contractual community-based services. So 70% of them, no record that they had been referred to one of those contractual providers. And the last thing I wanted to share in this section speaks to the amount of time between when DJS says, we'd like you to be participate in this program, and when the kid actually gets in that program. And as you can see on this slide, in some jurisdictions, it on average is around 20 days. In some, it's 40 days or even higher. And the reason I share this, and I think it's important, is because when we talk to providers, advocates, stakeholders, they would say, for some kids, and especially some younger kids, like the act of being arrested is, for some kids, like a pretty dramatic event. And it's potentially a turning point in a kid's life. And the sooner you get that kid into a service in the community that's going to mentor them, that might provide them with the cognitive behavioral therapy that they need, like the better off they are. But in a lot of cases, those referrals, if they happen, don't happen for 3 weeks, 5 weeks, or even more weeks. Our third chapter was about DJS's oversight of these providers that they're paying to treat kids who are living in the community. And there's only one slide in here on this, but I want to hit the highlights of that chapter. The first is that DJS is mostly focused on fiscal compliance of these contractors. So they submit reports along with their invoices that say how many kids they had, how long they've been in the program, did anyone get referred to them that they weren't able to get into their program. And there's some limited performance data for some of those providers, and some of that would be, did the kid complete the program successfully? And I think they also may report, did a kid reoffend while he was in that program? But most of the data that's gotten back from the providers is not about their success in treating a kid, but is about, you know, are they filling out the data required for them to get paid? And then when it comes to that data, we didn't see any evidence that they either validated it, and validation could be anything from a site visit to check somebody's records to other ways you could validate data, or that they used the data they got back to assess the quality or the performance of those providers. So again, we take limited funds, we give them to these providers. They hire people that go and treat kids in the community. And the information we get back is limited mostly to sort of basic statistics. The options to be able to refer a kid can sometimes be limited by scarcity. If there's not a provider to refer a kid to, you can't make a referral for that kid. Yes?
Yes, absolutely, go ahead.
Back on the previous slide.
Well, no, it's on that side, the oversight slide. I'm sorry. You say options for youth can be limited by provider scarcity, and there are no evidence-based services available in Baltimore City.
Yeah.
I know what the words evidence-based mean, but what does that really mean?
Yeah, so evidence-based services are a subgroup of all services that have been validated scientifically, that they have a statistically significant
I know the
impact.
concept, but I mean, does DGS has a list of those?
They do.
Okay.
So, and I do want to point out that, like, all the evidence-based services, like, they weren't until they were, right? So there's nothing to suggest that non-evidence-based services aren't doing.
No, I mean, I get the big picture. I'm just trying to understand mechanically, because this implies that there are services from the evidence-based list that are used in other jurisdictions, but not Baltimore City.
That's correct.
And then you relate to the previous slide, and Baltimore City is where the placements are done the fastest.
That's right.
Did you look into the relationship between those two things?
I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
But you made my point for me, which is that there are evidence-based services available to kids in some jurisdictions, but not in others. Baltimore City is one of the places where they are not available. And then also, DJS has limited visibility into any staffing issues at a provider level. And I know you guys have these budget hearings, and part of that is always what is the vacancy rate within your agencies. But you don't get that for the contractual providers that are the people actually out in the community working with the young people that DJS is responsible for. And contractor turnover at those places can be a challenge. They're hard jobs to fill. They're hard jobs to keep people in. And it's hard to make a referral to a provider that doesn't have the staff to be able to treat them. Our fourth chapter was on SINs. Again, that's children in need of supervision. And SINs kids, there's four main categories for these kids. So they're kids who are truant, they're ungovernable, they're a danger to themselves or others, or they're runaways or other what are called status offenses. Status offense is offense that can only be committed by a juvenile. Like, I can't run away as much as I might like to because I'm 50 years old. Senator?
But basically, they're not attacking somebody. It's like they're doing something that's sort of it's a technical violation of what they're supposed to be doing, but it's not like hitting somebody or stealing something. Is that the essence of it?
It's probably a better conversation for the secretary.
Okay, that's fine.
Because the changes to the law a couple of years ago, I think put a greater emphasis on being able to make SINs referrals for particularly young kids who by law weren't able to be charged with things that would be a crime if they were 15 or 16 years old. Okay.
Unruly kids. unruly sometimes, unmanageable kids in an
Right, so
environment.
I have in my notes, so an 11-year-old kid can't be charged with vehicle theft, at least they didn't used to be, I'm not sure if that's changed. But potentially they could be charged with a sins offense for being a danger to themselves or others.
Those of us common sense would think of it as a crime.
Right,
I see.
as an adult.
In Frederick County,
With the sins referrals?
yeah.
Yeah, I almost hesitate to share this slide because the
Do I need to put a tracking device on my grandson?
the number of sins referrals is going to vary a lot by jurisdiction. And I know the secretary is going to tell you that they have met with every jurisdiction and educated them on how sins can be used, how it's not to be used. It is just used differently by different jurisdictions. And some of that is probably cultural, but I think it's best to let the secretary speak to that. There's another issue, Senator, which is that at least one jurisdiction used to do intakes for kids that had been sins referrals, but they would never enter them into the database. And so like, there's just not a record of it.
Better update it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question related to this? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Who is doing these referrals? Do you know? Do we know like 80% of like someone, this group?
The secretary might know better, schools, police,
But you don't have data on that?
parents, no, I don't. It's not in the report.
Okay, if we could address that one.
The source of the sins referral.
Okay, thank you.
On this next slide, sins referrals have increased. So you can see in 2023, 550 or so. If you go back to 2022, there was only about 300. So there has been an increase. And most of them are for the blue category, which is kids referred for being ungovernable. And then most of the increase has been because of younger kids. So kids aged 10 to 12 years old, or even a couple of kids who are under the age of 10. And so there is an intake decision made on sins referrals, and in 82% of the cases, they are resolved at intake. 18% of the time, they were informal, and in just 0.3% of the time, which I think was 3 out of about 1,000 cases that we looked at, they were formal and referred to the state's attorney's office. Those 3, there are details about those cases and why they were referred in Chapter 4 of our report. One of the things that we thought was important to share with you was that of those 82%,
Maybe you're about to answer this. What does that mean, resolve no jurisdiction?
there's a couple of those where somebody would be brought in for something that DJS, like that wasn't a valid reason for a referral, and so they would just say, we don't have jurisdiction here, and that case would be resolved.
But that's 82% or that's a
No,
fraction
no,
of the 82%?
82% is all mostly resolved at intake.
I see, okay, thank you.
What was interesting is that we found of those 82%, over a quarter of them were resolved at intake without an intake meeting ever having happened. And so they may have attempted to meet with the family and the kid, but it didn't happen, and it got resolved, bureaucratically resolved. They have the latitude to be able to do that, and I think they can make an informed decision and see that this is a kid who attends school. It's the first time they've ever offended. They're 11 years old, and like make a decision absent a meeting with that child to resolve it at intake. But we thought that it was important to share that with you. Our last chapter was these case histories, and let me give you the history of this chapter. I think in March of last year, almost a year ago, the Attorney General announced the indictment of a number of young people for a series of armed robberies and armed carjackings. I think there were over 80 victims in total. And I want to start off by being clear that they are alleged to have committed these offenses. I have no idea if they actually did them, if the court has found them guilty, or if the court has found them delinquent. And I was just interested in understanding of these kids, and ultimately there were 15 of them. If DJS had been involved with them at any point earlier in their lives, and if so, what that involvement was like. And so I went through their case histories, which are in a database that DJS uses for case management called Assist. And I basically transcribed those histories anonymously in Chapter 5 of the report. And so to summarize what we found, over 2/3 of those referrals 14 of the 15 kids had had previous involvement with the Department of Juvenile Services. There's one kid that had never been involved with DJS before, but 14 of the other 15 had. And the average age, the median age that they first were in contact with DJS was 13 years old. I want to point out that this is obviously not a random sample of kids. Like, I picked these 15 kids because I knew that they had been indicted for these armed robberies and armed carjackings. I'll also say that the case history data is only as good as the data that was in the case management system, and I'm not able to validate it. Of those, collectively, these 15 kids had been referred to DJS 45 times, and in 31 of those cases, they were referred to the state's attorney's office. In 4 of those cases, they were informed, and in the other 10, they were resolved at intake. One of the interesting things was that based on what the intake decision tool, the IDT, recommended, DJS was more likely to sort of upgrade the disposition of that recommendation rather than to downgrade it. So, yes, sir.
Can you give us a little definition about upgrading and downgrading?
Sure. So the tool might have recommended resolve this case at intake, take the kid home, and don't have any further involvement with them. But they might have decided to refer it to the state's attorney's office instead. They did that 16 times where they took it, I would say, more seriously. And I think there were 2 times where they took it maybe less seriously than the IDT had recommended. Again, some of those decisions are guided by law, and so they make a decision that regardless of what the IDT says, they're required to do. Yes, sir. 5 of these 15 kids had been referred to these contractual community-based service providers in the past. I think at least 1 kid had been referred to what, maybe I should talk about some more, but are these non-contractual community-based providers, which are places that DJS doesn't have a relationship but they may refer a kid to anyway. They're much more likely to get home detention, GPS or electronic monitoring, or an evening reporting center, which is the after-school sort of help and activities and dinner and things like that, than to get referred to these community-based services. I'm going to quickly cover some recommendations. Their assist case management system was created in the 90s. That doesn't inherently make it bad, but it's a difficult system to query and get a simple answer from. And so some of the analysis we had to do, we might have done a sample because the information that we needed was just sort of something that's typed in and you weren't able to query it in the way we think a sort of contemporary database would be able to do. I know that they have explored alternatives to assist, and I think they can talk about maybe how they're thinking about that now and what they are thinking going forward. One of the things, we went to a community fair, I guess, in Prince George's County where a bunch of contractual providers, non-contractual providers, DJS, staff, other stakeholders sort of met, shared information, told each other who they are and what they do. And it sounded like from everybody I talked to, including my staff, that it was a great event. I don't know if events like that happen all over the state. And I don't know if a lot of the good things that DJS does are sort of replicated as best practices. And I think they should give some thought to trying to identify what's working well and making sure that's taking place, not just in one community, but in as many communities as possible. I think they should collect the data to know if their providers that they're paying money to take care of our kids and our communities are effective with them beyond just did a kid complete the program. I think they should also have some more visibility into the staffing levels of those providers. And then finally, they should make sure that there are providers available to kids wherever they live in the state, and I think that would include evidence-based services available to the Baltimore City kids. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I do want to, if you don't mind, just address one quick thing because I've presented this before, and so I know what questions people may have. And one of them was around recidivism and why didn't we look at recidivism? DJS for years has done, I think, a really good and accurate job of calculating various recidivism rates and publishing them very publicly in their annual data resource book. And so those are already out there, and I didn't want to spend my time redoing analysis that is already available to people. But it is reasonable to want to ask about that, and maybe in the questions, if there's any questions about recidivism, I'm happy to take them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, and again, happy to take questions.
Hey, look, thank you very much. And so I'll say on behalf of the committee, thank you for your diligence in this report. You know, we all have a responsibility. I can tell you, as every member here can tell you, and guests, that any community meeting that you go to, doesn't matter what it starts out to be, public safety becomes a focal point. Yep. You know, and so it is important that we take the ownership that we're supposed to have with this matter, because it takes more than just the courts, more than just DJS, more than just the law enforcement folks, and in some cases more than just the family, you know, and definitely the schools. So I appreciate the you know, the diligence that you had here, and we're going to go around the horn before we bring the secretary up. So Senator Lewis-Young.
Yeah, thanks very much. This may not be a question for you, but you can tell me if I should save it for the secretary. We've had a lot of conversations about AI, particularly as a predictive tool. So it would seem to me that there are certain warning signs or certain life experiences that we know through aggression analysis could be predictive of a child having a referral. And I'm just speaking off the top of my head, maybe single parent family or poverty neighborhood or not doing well in school or parents with a history of incarceration. I don't know what they are. But my point is, if we can do that kind of predictive projection, is there an opportunity to connect that child with services, whether it be mentoring or another service, before they get referred?
So I know a little bit about this, Senator, and let me say what I'm comfortable saying, and then I think the secretary would be happy to speak to it. But tools like that, whether, quote, AI or not, have been around for a while. And I think, I don't want to speak for the secretary, but I think Thrive is partially based on their analysis of kids who are the most likely to be the victim of gun violence or the perpetrator of gun violence. So there are tools, I think, and they have a pretty good data analysis staff there, that could, they've used tools like this on bail reform too, which is like who's likely to abscond, who's not. I think you could do that. There has been a long-standing concern that that sort of predictive ability not be used to punish somebody, that it be used maybe to offer resources, but that somebody is not punished based on the likelihood that they might do something. So I'll leave it at that. And if the secretary wants to go further than that, I'll let.
Thanks.
Thank you. Done very well there. Senator Roosevelt.
Thank you. I'm curious, particularly if there's a lot of data on it, why you didn't do any analysis of the recidivism data.
Well, the one thing we tried to do, Senator, that I was very interested in was look at two roughly equivalent groups of kids. In this case, kids who had been referred for second-degree assaults.
Yeah.
And some of them got contractual community-based services, because some do, and some don't. And to compare those two groups and see of the kids who are generally similar, and we had two similar groups statistically, age about the same, gender difference about the same. The kids that got these services, were they less likely to reoffend?
No, I get the issue.
Were they more likely to be enrolled and finish school, et cetera? I wouldn't publish that analysis unless I was confident in what it showed, like statistically, and we couldn't get there. It's some limitations in the data, and it's some other things. My staff's good at that. In this case, we did that analysis, and at the end of the day, I decided I didn't have enough confidence in it to put it in the report.
Was that because of the sample size or the quality of the data?
Sample size was okay. I think it was more the quality of the data.
Tell us more about that. I mean, this is a big issue.
It is a big issue, and it's something, I didn't put it in the recommendations, but like I said, I think DJS has some talent, and they have some people there who are good at this stuff, and I think it might be a decent investment of their time to see if they could do it.
I'm sorry to push on this a little bit. So what's wrong with the data that created this?
So again, some of
Lack of confidence.
Some of it is not captured in a way that you can use a piece of software to, like, things aren't in fields when you think of like a yes, no, or this kid got, there's a list of 20 different things a kid could have gotten, and like you pick one or you pick a bunch of them. A lot of this stuff is the equivalent of you taking notes. It's just you type them into a box on the in the assist system rather than writing them on a piece of paper. It's really difficult to analyze.
But that sounds a little bit like what Senator Young was talking about in terms of AI. I mean, that's the sort of thing that AI is really good at, is taking a lot of data that is not well organized and organizing it.
Maybe, but
And predictions too.
I think there's a
But also, you sort of get out what you put in.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but believe me, I understand that. That's what I'm trying
And
to see.
so, if I might,
Please.
I'll have some questions about accountability.
Okay.
You know, who's making sure that Corporal Jackson, when he picked that young person up out too late and tried to take him to his parents, and something happened, he ended up at Cheltenham versus, and then, is this a complete report? Are you writing this report, or are you completing this encounter or interaction the way that you've been trained to do?
You understand?
Or are you doing it the way that you've been trained to do while your partner's sitting there? So,
I understand.
so it's a lot of factors. So,
Okay.
Senator, I would also just point out that there's a technical issue with taking a bunch of sensitive data about children and plugging it into a black box.
absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. That is a huge part of it. So,
Okay.
to be continued, sir. Love when you guys get inquisitive about that stuff. Senator Sarling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the information and the opportunity to speak on this. The things that I see in this, and some of the questions that I have, especially you look at the cases resolved at intake and the numbers that are there. And, you know, after the third complaint, you know, and you see the numbers there at the same time, it seems that, you know, the repeat offense.
Yeah.
And those that, you know, we've seen, for instance, not just carjacking, but maybe tampering or things of that nature that do happen constantly. And my biggest concern is that we have recorded, and we have recorded referrals. So we have referrals. We have things that we know we have them. We have recorded other records of maybe crimes or things that happen. But do we also record incidents of things that have happened? Like there was a situation, it wasn't major, but it did happen. And so this was an incident that happened, and we have that recorded at the same time. And it's maybe a repeated incident that happened, that the same person went to this car, the next day went to this car, the next day went to this car, because we know, for instance, in my community, there's one juvenile that has 38 times of car theft or carjacking, going into the car constantly
How old
over and over. 14. And it's been the problem, and it's just repeated. And, you know, and this, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on, but my biggest concern is that accountability. There's got to be some kind of accountability when you have a juvenile going right back and doing the same thing. Right in your face, Mr. Police Officer, I'm going to be back. And that's his exact words. Mom and dad are up in the air, their hands in the air, I don't know what to do. I'm so I just don't know what to do,
Yeah.
mom and dad.
I read through all these case histories, obviously, and some other ones, and like some of those stories are heartbreaking, right? It's parents who don't know what to do. It's parents who have maybe moved because they want to try and get their kid away from whatever influence is on them. There are kids that have undiagnosed mental health issues. There are kids that should be taking medicine but don't have a prescription. It is very complicated. I do want to point out, Senator, and this comes up if you read those case histories in Chapter 5. They're incomplete, partially because I don't have visibility into decisions made in the judiciary. I don't have statutory access to that data. But as I'm sure DJS will be happy to tell you, a lot of the decisions for a kid to go home are not made by Secretary Schiraldi and his staff. They're made by a judge. Kids get emergency arraignments where a decision is made, like, are we going to keep this kid or are we going to send this kid back to their parents? And I don't know the decision-making and like what latitude they have in that. But DJS also, in many cases, has the decision to send a kid back home, but not in all cases. And so a lot of the reason that kids will get formal, they'll get referred to the state's attorney's office. They may, in some cases, get a hearing within 24 hours. And at that point, it's not DJS's decision on whether that kid goes home or whether they're held somewhere or anything else.
Well, I mean, by record or recording, it would be good that we would have those recorded, these incidents or these things that have happened, so we can know that we have by record everything that has happened in the community. It's this by age, 13, 14 years of age, and my other concern is that you were talking about community services and communities and the providers and what they provide. Can you, like, in detail, maybe talk about what kind of community services are provided, what we're providing these young people? Because I know all of it's not the same. I know it varies, and it'd be good to know that.
It does vary, and they're not apples to apples. So there's two main types. There's two buckets. One bucket is therapy, and there's two primary kinds of therapy that are evidence-based. One is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. The other is functional family therapy. So, and multisystemic therapy. Sorry, I forgot one of them. So there are providers we pay to treat kids with that therapy. There's, I think, two other providers, maybe it's three, that provide mentoring services for kids. Those are not evidence-based, but most of them have been around a long time. They treat a lot of kids. And those are the two types of providers that are in the community, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, I know all of them, you can't just go by one and that's going to work. I know you vary, and that's a good thing, I think. It's a very good thing, of course. I just want to make sure that everywhere throughout our state, that we have the right thing that we're providing for our young people.
Yeah.
That it's there, and we're not, we don't have things like it, because I know there's some things in question because of the action that has happened, but I just want to make sure, and I believe we all want the right and the proper steps and things we need to do for these young people that are constantly getting themselves in trouble because they have nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Or, they're hanging with the wrong people, or they're just bored,
And I think, I know this is a budget committee. I mean, I think maybe not this year, maybe not ever, but if those community-based services work, and I'd like to have more information about whether they do or not. But I think you would want more kids to be able to participate in things like that. If they work, again, thousands of kids at a time who are DJS involved are living at home. And only a couple hundred of them are, in a secure detention place. And I think there's probably more that we could do for them. And that's something that you guys can consider.
No doubt, no doubt. Thank you very much. We're going to finish up with Senator Rosepep before we bring up the Secretary, but I will say this, Mr. Powell, for members on the panel, members of the committee, there's a lot of work to be done. I can tell you, we've been here 11 years, not as long as Senator Rosepep, but I've served on a lot of task force work groups and whatever. I can tell you that the joint juvenile joint that we did here. I was one of the 3 delegates that sat on that, and we had 3 senators. It was one of the best that we had. We didn't get to, because of the timeline, we didn't get to the educational component, because it is very dicey dealing with juveniles versus an adult who has the educational, access to education, because sometimes juveniles aren't in the facilities that long. But we had every service provider, every interested party was a part of that. And that was a heck of a a step in the right direction, because you got that multifaceted perspective of what we're dealing with. And even had a couple of folks who had actually been in the system because they got on the wrong track and participated throughout the entire process. So we just need to keep it up. And we're going to, Senator Rosetrap's going to finish up, and then hang around as long as you can, sir.
Yes, sir.
And then we're going to move on and bring up the secretary.
Thank you. This is a clarification. I thought you heard you say that you didn't have visibility in judicial decisions.
That's right.
Explain that one to me.
The statute that created and governs my office gives us the authority to evaluate the executive branch, not the legislative or judicial.
First time I've ever heard that. I mean, because obviously this is an agency that interacts with the judiciary. Shouldn't we fix that?
I'm going to stay out of that one.
Well, I'm asking your real advice. I mean, from a program point of view, I mean, forget the politics of it. From the job we've given you to do,
Yeah.
given that we have executive agencies that interact with the judiciary in material ways, why wouldn't it make sense for us to do that? Maybe put it that way.
Well, let me diplomatically say that I think in those case histories, you can read between the lines and understand what is happening at the judicial level that impacts a kid who is also engaged at the executive branch level.
Okay, but I'm asking more generally. I mean, if you don't answer, you don't have to answer, but I'll just put it on there.
We got you.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, that seems ridiculous to me. All right, thank you.
Again, more to discuss, and I will, thank you, Ms. Powell. So,
Thank you.
look, if you all remember, not so long ago, one of the executive nominations, from the Supreme Court, we had a member, one of our senators from Prince George's he lived in his district. They had not made contact, so he did not speak on his behalf. But part of his appointment, there was some controversy when he was the juvenile master in Prince George's, that he made a decision. And, yes, so we'll talk further. Mr. Secretary, come on up, your team, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. No problem. We are a small but mighty team. So I'm Vinny Schiraldi, Secretary, Department of Juvenile Services. This is Kara Annenson, our Legislative Director, who for much of the previous year, almost all of the previous year, has been also in charge of services. But I'll get more into that in a moment. So I'm going to start. Thank you for having me here. It feels like we could be doing this in your living room. It's nice Friday afternoon here, and a small number of folks, so it feels very intimate. I would like to discuss what I thought was an excellent Office of Program and Evaluation and Government Accountability report, and share what steps we've taken to address the challenges raised and discuss some of our plans for the future. Before I start, I want to thank Mike and his team for the excellent report. Every time I hear him go through it, there's a combination of a learning and a root canal, a public root canal. So first I want to say most, but not all of the data in the report predates my time here. We didn't really talk about a lot of the time frames, but it goes from FY18 to FY23. I was here for 5 months of FY23, 4.5 years predated me. But I think it's accurate. And a lot of the things that they identified, we were identifying and beginning to address. Not all of them. I did learn some new things. So that was one point. Two is most of the report talks about inputs, as Mike said, not about outcomes. Outcomes that you've addressed are recidivism. We have lots of data on that, a whole big, thick data book that we publish every year online. We just published the last year's in February. I'll make sure you all get a copy of it. But the good news is, reconviction rates for kids on diversion, on probation, and on aftercare are all down. They've all declined over the last 5 years. Again, that also predates me, so I'm not even bragging about myself. They've just been going down. So I'll really, for the rest of my time, what I'll do is I'll talk about sort of two things. One is the expansion of programs that you were all just addressing right now. And the other thing is just some of the very specific things raised in the Opega report. So when I got here, I started to identify some I thought, pretty serious problems. One is I did 2 listening tours. I went to every county in the state, met with the judges, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, law enforcement, social services, families, and kids twice. I did that once my first year and once my second year. Most of them I did face-to-face. The judges always were the ones organizing them. Sometimes the judges wanted to do virtual, so I did virtual. But whenever I could, I did them face-to-face. Some of the things I heard over and over and over again with less precision than Mike just presented them were we don't have enough programs. And that really ranged, and it was dependent on the jurisdiction. Some of the jurisdictions, they don't have a lot of serious offenses. They want upfront diversion programs and programs for kids. And some places they want kids, programs for kids that are shooting people. And that just was obviously very different by jurisdiction. The other thing was we had been cutting those programs. It wasn't just that they accidentally went away. The department and the administration were not funding them. So if you listen to testimony from the youth service bureaus, you'll hear they used to predominate in the state, and now they're hanging on by a thread. We didn't have until recently a residential drug treatment program for adolescents. That closed in 2019 with all the kids using fentanyl at this point. To close the only residential drug treatment program was crazy. And MDH just reopened one in Baltimore City this last year. We gave back $134 million from our budget over the previous 10 years. So a little over $13 million a year went unspent. So a bunch of things now. And first of all, I brought this to Governor Moore's attention. We got a federal grant of $850,000 just to do more precise analysis of the kinds of things that were identified. What are the outcomes from these programs? What are the gaps? And the gaps are going to be very different in Cecil County than they are in Prince George's, than they are in Garrett. And it's just a very, very diverse state. We really need a county-by-county analysis that will come from both data, looking at what's the data about the kids, but also what's the data about what's available in those counties, and from conversations with stakeholders, because they're going to know stuff that you just can't get from data. So we brought on an assistant secretary. That's a new position. Before this, the position of looking at our continuum of care and doing the kind of analysis Mike said was buried in the bureaucracy. It was not at a high level. Now it is at a high level. We had to get that approved and then, look for somebody and then onboard somebody. So I'll talk a little about 3 areas where we've increased programs, and I'll get specific on the Opega stuff. During my first year at DJS, 42 kids were shot or shot somebody. I only got about 1,500 kids on my caseload. So, there's a lot of numbers flying around. Think about this like a high school with 1,400 kids where 42 of them shoot somebody or get shot. Those are crazy numbers. I ran probation in New York City before this, had 30,000 people on my caseload. 42 of them didn't shoot somebody or get shot. So I prioritized gun violence. Mayor Scott had done, I thought, a really nice job of scientifically looking at, using regression analysis, looking at where people are getting shot and who is doing the shooting. And so, because violence is concentrated by person and place. So we did that with our kids. And we started the Thrive Academy in 4 counties, 4 jurisdictions, I should say, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Prince George's, and Anne Arundel. That accounts for 82% of the kids who were killed in Maryland the year we did this, 23. And what we did was we did a regression analysis with the help of the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform and the Casey Foundation on 30,000 cases from the previous 3.5 years to just say what factors separate the 98% of kids who are not involved in gun violence that we touched from the 2% who were. And then we made those the intake criteria for the Thrive Academy. The governor then gave us $2.4 million worth of APRA money. We got another $750,000 grant from the Pull-Up Fund in Prince George's County, and we started the Thrive Academy. Thrive Academy then pairs young people who are at high risk of gun violence, either as a perpetrator or a victim, and it's the same criteria that define both, with a life coach who will work with them to develop a life plan, and that we resource that plan. So if the kid wants to go to college, or if they want an apprenticeship, we will resource that to happen. If they want to go to, HVAC school, vocational training, we will resource that. If they or their family are in danger, we will move them. We sit down at first and we have a conversation with them about the ramifications of gun violence. You could get killed or hurt. Your family could get killed or hurt. Somebody in your network could get killed or hurt. It sounds stupid and rudimentary, but these are kids. They don't really kind of process the same way we adults do. And so, it's only fair to tell them, and, prison's here. You can go to prison for this. This is your sort of last chance. So we started that up in September of 23 in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, and then in January and February in Prince George's and Anne Arundel. So far, the young people that have gone through it, fewer than 2% of them have been shot. None of them have been killed. 4 out of 5 of them have not been arrested for a gun crime. I don't have, because I know you're going to ask, a counterfactual yet, but I don't have a comparison group, right? We're not randomly assigning it. Everybody who fits the criteria is eligible to enter. So we literally yesterday with the University of Pennsylvania and University of Maryland, who are our researchers funded by the KC and Pull-Up Foundations, we're discussing various different scenarios for counterfactuals. It's late on a Friday. I'm happy to talk to you about that if you want, but I won't
Well,
go too deep.
the good thing about it, Mr. Secretary, is that you come before us a number of times, so.
I'll be back.
So we have the
Like Arnold
opportunity.
Schwarzenegger said, I'll be back. So I think decent early results. The other good thing about the kids in being arrested for gun crimes is that's declining. So that's 16 months worth of data, but the last few months it's lower as a percentage than it was in the first few months. I'm hopeful. The numbers are very small, so it's hard to do sort of generalizations about the trends because it's 3, it's 1, it's not 30,000. So, but I'm glad it's going down and not going up. Secondly,
Yes, sure.
Back to your 42 kids and the folks who are in the Thrive. Paint me a picture of these kids. I don't know what genders they are. I don't know how old they are. I don't
almost
know
all
what their
boys,
situation is.
almost all Black and Latino. There's a handful of girls, but just not that many in this population. Really challenging lives, like you had mentioned.
How old?
They're going to be mostly 15, 16, 17, a couple of 18-year-olds. And they can stay on our caseload till they're 21. So
Right, I understand, but I'm just trying to picture.
yeah,
who-
15,
so I
16,
gotta
17,
picture my
18. Yeah.
And so, when you say really challenging lives, give me the 3 big
Not
data
work.
points.
Not working or in school, almost always, even though they're legally obligated to be.
Okay,
Not working or in school.
okay.
Often there's some other traumatic life event. Their family just got evicted. They just got kicked out of school. Lots of arrests, a ton of arrests. And you have to have at least one violent prior adjudication. So we're not releasing these kids. They are already in the community, and we put them on Thrive.
Lots of arrests?
Yeah, many arrests, also for many of them, many adjudications, but they have to at least have one violent adjudication. And then often there is some other precipitating event, because we said to the police, we won't, these are our criteria. If a kid fits this criteria, we're gonna go get them and have them be in this. But if you know of somebody, tell us, right? Because I don't care what these criteria are. If a kid's best friend just got killed, they're eligible, because decent chance they're gonna enact a reprisal, or the guy that killed their friend is gonna think they're gonna enact a reprisal and shoot them, right? So we've told the police, and there's a bunch of credible messenger groups, the sort of violence interrupters. We've told them, if you know of kids that, the kids are posting this stuff online, right? So the cops know because they're on they're actually friends with the kid on,
Yeah.
fill in the blank, right? So they'll refer to kids and we'll take
I
them.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
So then girls, the girls were spread out all over the place, in my view. When there's a handful of girls in a boys' correctional facility, it's a boys' correctional facility, and the girls are always an afterthought. So, and that's what the sort of thinking in the field is. So we brought all the girls together in the Western Maryland Children's Center, and trained staff on gender-specific programming. We softened the facility. We worked with the girls to find out what kind of needs they had, and we specifically designed that facility to be a girls' facility that is gender-specific. We also, it takes a while to procure stuff in Maryland. It takes a while to procure stuff everywhere, but Maryland is a challenge for sure. So we, again, we've talked to a bunch of judges about this and who have specific interests in girls and other key stakeholders. And we're issuing a request for proposals. Has that gone out yet? It's going out soon, right?
Same minute is going out soon, yeah.
Right, and it'll be for whole continuum of care. So it'll be staff secure custody for the girls, independent living, therapeutic foster homes, and wraparound services in the community. Those things none of those things exist now for girls. And then workforce development. When we talk to our kids, they would like to work. They want to work. They don't.
Mr. Secretary, before you go further, unfortunately, in Maryland, we don't have those for women either. So we're working
don't
on
what?
that for women either. So the female gender is not being paid attention to in that system, and so that's.
In these, I ran adult correctional facility, I ran Rikers Island, and, when you have a system so dominated by men, it just seems like a natural inclination that the women or the girls are an afterthought, and so we did that on purpose. So workforce development, when we ask our kids what they want to work. Now, sometimes that's unrealistic, but that's a good instinct that we want to build on, right? We don't want to squelch that. We had one 12-slot mediocre work program for the kids and nothing else. So we have now bought 128 summer youth employment programs slots, 86 year-round slots. Young people in our facility who have a high school diploma or a GED were often kind of sitting idle. Maybe they would take an online college class, but they weren't doing a lot. We started this apprenticeship program. We call it YOLO. The kids named it. Doesn't mean you only live once. It means youth opportunities to learn occupations. And we partner with DNR and Department of Environment so the kids can go out of the facility once they've earned, the trust of the facility. So they have to kind of get up in their levels, and then they can go out and work. And they're getting paid when they work those jobs, cutting trails,
Yeah,
I don't know, whatever they do.
Well, I tell you, if you look at some of these, because we aren't as connected as we should be, even within the same government. I mean, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and others have programs where from age 18 to 25 now, where these young folks can get jobs. But the trust has to be built in. But, they are built for just that. Taking high schoolers, getting them involved in programs, then getting them to the point where they can then understand how serious they are about it. But there are, again, so we aren't as connected as we should be, but we got to start somewhere, so.
Yep. And we've been in conversation now with Department of Housing and Community Development, the Maryland Stadium Authority. We're going to be coming your direction soon at the port. We talked to the Carpenters Union, Transportation and Environment. Everybody's willing to require their vendors to do apprenticeships with our kids. We are going to pay a nonprofit to do the soft skills and to help them get a GED. And the Department of Education has given us a waiver so that we can now put 17-year-olds in this if they have below 12 credits. But they can't just drop out if they have below. They have to be in a GED program and a workforce development program.
That's terrific foresight. I mean, we put 17-year-olds in the military. So, with permission. With your permission, they can get in the program.
Yeah, and the opposite thing is if they're on our caseload and they're 17 and they're not going to school, we are trying to force them to go to school because that's our job, right? The judge orders them to go to school. And so then we're kind of torturing them because there's no way. I mean, they know they're not going to graduate. You got 10 credits and you're 17.
Absolutely. Senator Roosevelt.
All right.
You're just talking to people who are in your facilities? What is the group you're talking about you're doing?
That's just that YOLO program. It's the 17 kids, 19 kids now in facilities. All the rest of the programs are for kids on probation and aftercare. And that's about 1,500 kids.
Okay, so where I was going with this was, so how does it work now in terms of getting in the 1,700 kid crowd, the bigger crowd of kids, who I presume a lot of them are also disconnected from work and school?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Some yes, some no. No.
Some yes, some no, but
I mean, 13-year-olds are going to school. We got 13, 14, 15-year-olds. They got to go to school.
but most of your folks are older than that.
Third are between 17 and 21. So 2/3 are below that.
Okay. I guess where I'm getting my head around this, but where I'm kind of going with this is, and you've heard this from me before, and they all have heard this from me more than many times. I mean, your point about the group you were talking about, the kids who want to work. I mean, the story that I always love to tell, I'm going to tell it briefly, is when we were designing the high school for working teens, we had a group of adults, including Kathy Oliver, who was the head of CTE for the MSD, and Dwayne Arbogast, and a whole variety of folks. We're sitting around the room, we're brainstorming about high school kids working. And we said, who here worked while they were in high school? And everybody raised their hand. And so we went around and said, why did you work in high school? Was it the money? Was it your parents wanted you to work? And Kathy Oliver she said, well, it's obvious. When you're a teenager, when you're in school, you're treated like a kid.
Right.
When you work, you're treated like an adult. What teenager doesn't want to be treated like an adult rather than a kid?
Yep.
And so that's kind of where I'm going with this, in the sense of, do you or somebody or the workforce board or somebody have a focused strategy on the kids who've gotten in some kind of trouble to get them paid work?
Yeah. So yes, and that's a new strategy because we just started an office specific to workforce development. We hired a director, and they are getting these partnerships. We have money in our budget that you all provided us, right? So Thrive has now been continued. It's not funded by APRA money anymore. And all of this workforce development. We'll hire nonprofits to help with the soft skills, things like living classrooms or National Center Institute. There's a bunch of groups out there that help with those kinds of soft skills and the GED part if the kid doesn't have a high school diploma. And what we're doing is we're cutting deals with employers, right, to pay the kids for the apprenticeships.
Absolutely. Senator Lewis Young, before you go.
And then I got a bunch of specific OPEGA responses.
I'm going to follow up on the conversation you were just having about one of the requirements is you have to be in school. Does that include virtual program?
So the judges require the kids, right? Like everybody's got to be in school if they're under 18, except for the kids that have our waiver.
Right.
And they can be virtual. So kids, particularly kids that have bad offenses, the schools they won't let them come to school. They got to be on virtual.
All right, I'm gonna be we try to keep us on task, all of us, not just. And we're gonna try to get done by 5 o'clock. We're gonna try. Okay. We're gonna try. So we're gonna let you address the OPEGA.
Okay, I'll go quick. So OPEGA rightly reported, and you asked about this, whether we had contracts for evidence-based practices in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. We did not, when they wrote their report, have contracts for multisystemic therapy or functional family therapy. Last year, we launched a procurement process. We just closed that process, and those services should begin in the spring. Are you moving? Okay. The case management system, it's that CJAMS. You guys have heard a lot about it.
Every agency. Go ahead.
Yeah. And the thing, for us, the thing that's most important for you to know is it's a case-based system, which is what is appropriate for child welfare. We are a client-based system. Right. The family is not our client. It's the kid. And that system is not meant for us. So it took us a while to figure that out. We just finished what they call a sprint with Department of Human Services, us, and Do It. That found what we knew, which is it's not appropriate for us. So we're going to figure out whether we buy something off the shelf or we design something internally. That won't happen quickly. Mike's team recommended that we do some things to fix the current system. So what we did was we surveyed all of our case managers and asked them, tell us any cases that you've referred, any programs you've referred a kid to 5 or more times in the last year. And now the results are in, that's 300 programs. We're adding them to that clunky old 25-year-old system as a drop-down menu. It wasn't, just to be clear, it wasn't like we weren't referring kids to programs or not recording them. We just weren't recording them in a way that we could use a management tool to know I sent 320 kids to the boys club. It's in some case note, and maybe AI could pull it out. But now we just have a drop-down menu. So that'll happen before the end of the legislative session. University of Maryland, go to that one just so you can see. We do more evaluations than was mentioned. So these are the evidence-based 3 programs we have: multisystemic therapy, family functional therapy, and family-centered treatment. Family-centered treatment is not yet gold standard evidence-based, but it's evidence-informed. This is all done for us by the University of Maryland, and soon Thrive will be added to this. So I want to just pick one box here so you can see I'm not only trying to talk about good news. Look at that family-centered treatment box under discharges. Only 36% of the kids successfully completed. So what did we do with that? We went back to the model developer. They decertified 2 of the 3 vendors that were having terrible success rates. And we brought new vendors on. And between us and the University of Maryland, we're working with those vendors to get the successful completion rate up. If you look over there at the outcomes are pretty good. 95% maintained placement with their family, which means they didn't do something bad enough to get pulled out of their family. 78% improved family functioning. So we are evaluating them, and you will next year have data like this on the Thrive Academy as well. And those are some of our bigger programs.
Very good. Thank you.
Other more recent actions, I said what we did with the non-contract programs. Oh, the other thing we did was, if we don't pay a program, they don't have to submit to our evaluation. The boys club ain't gonna submit to my evaluation. But we send a lot of kids to the boys club who get in fistfights and get those assault 2s, right? And so, but somebody's paying them, and maybe that somebody's evaluating them. So since the judicial proceedings OPEGA meeting, we reached out to all the local management boards and all the workforce development boards in the state to ask them if they have any evaluations of the 300 programs we just added. We haven't gotten them yet and aren't, but that's what we're doing. We're not going to just live in ignorance.
Well, do me a favor, and I don't want to break my own rule, but keep us informed on that. I've done a lot of work in my career with those local management boards, so please let us know.
And then SINs will be the last thing I talk about. 2 buckets. I just want to say this again. Kids who commit an act that would not be a crime if they were an adult. Running away from home. By the way, you can run away from home, Mike. It's just not a crime if you do. That's the thing.
He told him as well.
Run away, right? Run away from home, skipping school, drinking alcohol.
Run.
Those are sort of typical SINs cases. But now there's a new category because of the law you all passed that went into effect a few months before I got here, which was kids under the age of 13, if they get arrested for nonviolent crimes, can't be prosecuted. The police, when I got here, were very frustrated about that. They thought they couldn't do anything. So again, we was like, no. There's stuff you can do. It's just you can't arrest them. But if what this is about is getting them services, make a SINs referral. So we went and did what we call lunch and learns, which is informational sessions in every county in the state with the local police. And if they want, it was always police, sometimes schools and social services came, and sometimes families came. And then we did that again. And so that resulted in a 10-fold increase in SINs referrals and a 24% reduction, so almost a quarter, in recidivism for kids under age 13. So it worked. It's beginning. It's not all perfect. There's still more recidivism than we'd like. But so in conclusion, we inherited a continuum of community services with serious gaps, no programming focused on gun violence, very little vocational programming for a population that consistently says they want to work, underserving SINS kids, and with a system lacking in serious programmatic oversight and a modern youth case management system. All of which Opega rightly points out, we launched efforts in all of those areas, receiving additional funds from the General Assembly, ARPA, the Federal Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and the philanthropic community to expand our continuum. We're very serious about public safety. And we know that if our kids don't stop messing up, they're gonna get adult records. It's their last shot at not going to prison or not being saddled with those felony convictions, which are really gonna hobble them as they go forward. And so, you know, we're always open to hearing this. And like I said, it's hard to hear, but it's not about easy, right? It should be about hard. So we're committed to improving, and happy to answer any questions you have.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Senator Sullivan.
No, thank you for all the information. I mean, as you know, one of the biggest problems we've had, and you brought it up yourself, Mr. Secretary, is juvenile crime itself. You had 66 arrests, and I think it was in 23, and you had an increase of 146%, and it went up to over 163. And that was one of the problems that they were talking about, some serious problems of just trying to, you know, get into the right place to make sure that we put, for instance, the right programs or the right things out there for juveniles. But it still hasn't taken care of the problem. And that was just a percentage, and I don't know the outcome it was for that year, from 23 to 24. But the numbers have been astronomical. And that was just Baltimore City. Baltimore County had a lot of incidents as well. But some of the incidents that have happened and the problems that are there are some of the problems that the youth have done. They have gone in and right out, and nothing has happened. Perfect example was a person was hit in the head, and he's partially blind now. And that was a terrible thing that happened to that individual. There was a man that got beat up badly and stomped in the head and took his stuff and they ran. And they felt that they still haven't found, I think they found one but didn't find the other. And it just seems that at times when these incidents do happen, it just seems that there's no accountability. And, you know, we want to make sure more than anything, and you said it yourself, public safety is a major thing. It is a major thing, no matter how young or how old you are, there needs to be accountability. And what's troubling is that people are out there and they're so frustrated that, you know, whether you're a juvenile or you're an adult, when you attack someone and you hurt somebody and there's permanent damage, there's permanent things that are happening to people. We want just to make sure that they get the right services, that make sure that the services are there, that there is some accountability, that they're not a repeat offender, there's no recidivism, that they're getting the right counseling, the right training, the opportunity that they're not going to go back and do this again. We're going to say, we're going to give you this type of training. We're going to make sure that you're going to get out. You're going to get a job. You can be a responsible citizen. You can pay taxes. And that's what I think people, more than anything, I don't want the person to be in jail for the rest of their life. I believe in second chances. But when you have third, fourth, fifth, or sixth times, and it's the same person that seems like as a revolving door. And I think that's what's being seen out there, okay? Yeah. That's what's being seen out there. And my biggest concern is, again, I'll emphasize this. Public safety is the #1 thing to me. Yep. That's one of the reasons why we're here, is public safety. Is there something more that we're missing? Or is there something more that we need to do to make sure when that group of kids are out there and they're attacking people, they're taking their car keys or whatever they're getting, and they're just violating, they're hurting people in the middle of the day. It's terrible. There need to be accountability with the parents. They need to be accountable with the kids. What more can we do to make sure that these percentages don't go up, but we can cut them in half, make them go back down? put more community areas out there for our young people so they can be in youth programs. How can we help that out?
Yeah, that's a great question. Is there any chance you could flip back to Mike's presentation and go to his, oh, you're doing it? And go to his first chart? I'm sorry, I was looking at you. I thought, I didn't know where the magic was happening.
And I'll say before you go there, I think, you know, again, society as a whole has always had something to do with what we do in the criminal justice system. It's a five-legged stool that operates at best, oftentimes, with efficacy as a three-legged stool. But you know, we like to say in the business that, you know, tripods are great for some things, right? If you're a photographer, you know, but it can also work detrimentally if you're a sniper. So that's a metaphor. However, if we're not doing all of our jobs, if we take out apprenticeship programs and CTE programs in our schools, which we did, we made that decision decades ago. We took those out. So what were the opportunities? Not everybody's going to go to college. Not everybody's going to go to the military. They just want to learn something to get into the workforce.
Yep.
We did that. We created that. We took away Boys and Girls Club. We took away what do you call it?
Recreation and parks.
We took those away. You know, and so you know, since 2016 in this General Assembly, we have been trying to. We've been on its justice reinvestment, you know, focus. But again, it takes a bunch of services that we took away to try to get them back in. These conversations are healthy, and we just need to make a commitment. But a lot of the things that we're seeing is not only it's never with one agency, and it's never about one thing. You know, I live in a rural area for a reason, you know. But we have to also understand, I can tell you about juvenile crime in the morning before they go to school because the parents are in the cars driving somewhere to go to work and the kids are home, you know, for a couple of hours. They're up or they're home a couple of hours on the other end. And that's when we could clock it. We knew exactly when those things were occurring. You know, a family moves for a better life. You know, there are a number of things there, but this is good. This report is good. So Senator,
can I just?
Yes, absolutely.
Just real quick. I really agree with everything you said there. I mean, and with what you said, Senator, you know, if you look at the case stories, I think that's a good example, right? Those sort of, I don't know, 20 pages of case stories. And what Mike said is, like, this is a hearing about DJS, right? One of these kids, only once on page 50, was adjudicated delinquent. That's when we get involved in a deep way. All the rest of the stuff is us, we hold them or we put them on electronic monitors. But electronic monitoring is not a program. It's just a vehicle to know where you are.
It's just an attachment that you can say, I know where he's at. He's right at home right now. Oh my gosh, he's out in the middle of the street.
But
And
look at
I
these-
do understand that, yeah.
But look at these kids. Look at Youth B, right, on page 49.
I'm
He
right here.
starts in 2018.
Yep.
And he goes, it's all the way till 2022
Yep.
before he's actually adjudicated delinquent. And he's the only one adjudicated delinquent. There's no other adjudications in here. So that means none of them are on probation. None of them are ordered into treatment. The only thing that's happening pre-trial is kind of like adults pre-trial, right? Yep. You get put on an electronic monitor, and that's kind of it. And so, you know, and I'm not trying to say anybody did. I'm not saying the judge did anything wrong, the prosecutors did anything wrong. It's just when Mike introduced this, I made a real point. It said, this is to look at sort of DJS activity. The 99% of what's on these pages has nothing to do with us, except we did put the electronic monitor on the kid and monitor, right? And so that's I'm really glad. I remember you mentioned the Juvenile Justice Reform Commission, that in that big legislation that passed last year, you established another commission like that. Judge Davis chairs it. That is really a good opportunity because the prosecutors are on it, defense attorneys on it, all those community groups, kids that were formerly locked up. There's a couple of mothers on it, a couple of elected officials.
Behavioral health
And
folks.
that gives us the opportunity to really dive deep into this like we're never going to finish this conversation today. You're always going to end up at the end of this conversation frustrated, But those, we're really diving in and saying, how can we get the kid the help sooner? Why does it take, I met with Chief Worley, Commissioner Worley today and showed him my electronic monitoring headquarters, which you're all welcome to come and take a look at. It's in downtown Baltimore, right? And we took him through a specific kid's case, a kid that he knew that had violated, and it was, you know, a carjacking case that the judge put him on an electronic monitor. And we were showing him minute by minute. The monitor went off because the kid was in violation. Phone call made to the kid's home. Staff member went out, all rapidly, right? Went to the kid's house, he wasn't there. Numerous phone calls occurred. We're still getting alerts. The thing makes noise, so the thing on his leg was telling him, call your officer, call your officer. All of this is recorded, right? And then finally we said, okay, on like 2 hours, we reported him to the court, got a writ and told BPD, right? And Chief Worley knew all of this. 6 weeks later, we got the writ. It took 6 weeks for us to get the writ for that kid to get picked up. So there's a whole bunch of bits of this system, but the kids, some of the cases you'll see in here, it's 6-9 months between the bad act or the alleged bad act and some level of accountability being ordered. The kid forgot what he did by that amount of time. So,
and that's part of what I'm talking about. It's the entire system, you know. And again, it's five components to the system, and we have to all be diligent about what we're doing. Senator Roosevelt.
You finished up?
Oh, I'm sorry.
All right, well, I'll get back in. Try to be brief. I want to go to two charts here on the report. One is this one, Exhibit 2.6, which is about cases forwarding decisions for first-time offenders by county. Huge divergence by county. And then the same thing that Senator Young raised about the SINS referral, which is Exhibit 4.1. Help me understand, I would have assumed, not knowing anything about this business like you guys know about it, that there would not be wide variation by county.
because it's all us.
I think it is, right?
We're the ones making those decisions.
Okay, so how can you?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I paid attention to that. I think there's a couple reasons. One is, people are individuals too. They live in a county. My staff are interacting with cops in that county. And I don't know if you felt this way, but the cops they're throwing heat when we divert kids, right? And they may be throwing more heat in Charles than they are in Montgomery. The Montgomery police may be more amenable to us closing cases at intakes than the police are in Charles County, right? It's not just like we say we're closing this at intake and the police don't respond to that. They're like, damn it, I've been chasing this kid for 3 weeks. You ain't closing him at intake. And sometimes my staff listen to that and they react.
Okay, this is like new information to me. So you're saying it's the culture of interaction?
Well, that's one thing.
Between
right?
your staff and the police generally?
That's one thing, right?
Okay.
The other thing is police in various different counties respond differently to different behaviors. And they told me this when I went to different parts of the state. Like I remember one Eastern Shore police officer, police commissioner saying, somebody steals a bike here, it matters. Somebody steals a bike in Baltimore City, they don't even, chase it down. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but he knows what matters in his county, right? My one thing about Montgomery County might be, they might be picking the more serious cases to bring to us. They might themselves, because police are allowed to divert as well, they might be closing a lot of cases at intake and diverting before it ever gets to us. So the only ones left might be the ones that need more services.
Okay.
So that could be another thing. And then thirdly, they could just have more services in some counties than they have in others, so it's not as much of an option.
Okay, so let's go to the other chart then.
But two more things about this.
Okay, all right.
One is only misdemeanors that are non-gun. Just when you're thinking about diversion, because somebody said carjacking, we don't divert carjacking. We divert misdemeanors, one. And two, if the state's attorney doesn't agree, right, but law enforcement doesn't agree, they can appeal it to the state's attorney. And when we divert, we always have to ask the victim. So it's not just us sitting in a room, and maybe the victims in Charles County and more.
Okay. You finished on this
Yeah.
one? Okay, but let me pursue this one a little bit more then. I mean, I get your analogy about crimes in different places have different weights in term, I get that. But this is so extreme that I would suggest it's a good candidate for deep research.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So anyway, I just want to
It might be a
suggest,
natural experiment, yeah.
yeah, I mean, seriously, because I mean, this is,
What's better?
yeah.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, yeah, no, I think.
So
that's a
anyway,
good
I mean,
point.
you might learn something. Now, the other one on the SINS referrals. This,
By age?
sorry?
You mean by age?
I'm talking about,
Oh,
I'm talking about 4.1.
This
Frederick County is the leader.
Yes.
And Harford County, like, nobody's being referred in Harford County. What's going on there?
Well, so remember now, this one is really gonna be affected by what we just did, right? So none of what we were doing, those lunch and learns I mentioned, where we went and told law enforcement how to make a SINS referral, are reflected in this, or almost none, right? Because this is gonna take you to 5 months into my time here, July of '23. And we did those lunch, that's when we were starting those lunch and learns. So there's been a tenfold increase in SINS referrals since most of this
And
chart.
so,
So I don't know what the new chart would show.
okay, but the theory you're propounding is that whenever this data is from, there,
18 to 23.
18 to 23,
Right.
there was a widespread view that people shouldn't do SINS referrals,
I think that's probably right.
except in Frederick County, where and that's it. I'm serious. It's like they got it and the other people didn't. It's kind of the implication.
Good. Say
That
what
must be it.
I'm seriously asking that.
I was just saying, like, sometimes it could be a truancy program if they're running a truancy court or something like that, right? They could have some things going on, right? Frederick, we know that you have a
We have a
truancy.
pilot program,
Exactly, so they could be
yes.
using the SINS process for something like that, for a truancy program where they then are more aware of SINS and are using that to bring kids in to use their truancy court.
And also, Senator Rosepip, in your county of Prince George's, and there are a number of other counties, we've had magistrates who brought on deferred diversion programs. State's attorneys, some state's attorneys have their own diversion programs, so sometimes you'll never see those numbers. But also, when you look at some graphs, there are some counties where, the system doesn't take lightly to crimes. And they're more, they have the opportunity to delve more into it because of the number of crimes in those counties versus other crimes. So there are a lot of factors where you don't do certain things in certain counties. And the way law enforcement is administered is a little different sometimes.
And by the way, none of these would have been crimes. These were only.
No, I got you.
These were the
And
real child
just
welfare.
interaction, just the interactions, It's like, hey, do I try to take you home, or do I try to go down and talk to the DJS person that I know? Or do I go to, it's the same thing with an adult. Do I go to a commissioner who I know and say, hey, so it's a lot of different factors that are going on.
Let me just double down then. That's very helpful. I see exactly what you're saying. Again, this is both for DLS and for you. I mean, I think once you get new data in this, I think this is a research opportunity as well. And then secondly, coming back to, because now I'm really interested in it, this notion of the evaluation unit not being able to look at what the judiciary is doing. I mean, this kind of underlines this like 5 times.
Yeah.
It's all interactive, and we got to look at it, I mean, as a system and not as just one piece of it. So I just make that point.
I will say that's the
Oh, yeah,
bad news. The
absolutely.
good news is this commission really is, it's not an OPEGA type evaluation.
But they're looking at the issues that way.
Yeah.
That's good. That's great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Cool. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Secretary, we really appreciate
thank
you
you.
taking this opportunity. And I think you touched very briefly on the treatment center, Catoctin Treatment Center.
Oh, I did not.
Could you very briefly?
Sure.
Can you very briefly?
So, yes, so part of the conversation as I was going around the state was we need more residential treatment beds for substance abuse kids and for kids, that have substance abuse issues. And the state's attorneys were very strong on this issue. So the governor heard that and they put $3 million in our budget to open that. It says Catoctin, but we're not committed to Catoctin. We're looking at whatever, we're scanning for the most appropriate place. You know, we're not committed to running it ourselves. We could contract for it. We're working with MDH. We're looking at their data, we're looking at our data, and we're gonna look at the available locations. We're doing all of that now. You know, we don't yet have the money in our budget, because if it does get in our budget, we don't want it to be flat-footed.
No, we got you. And it's something that we all learn from, you know, when we're looking at something. If we get wedded to something and it doesn't happen, then now we're the bad guy or young lady, right? So the key is you're looking from a broad perspective, you know, ensuring that these young folks get the treatment that's needed. Maryland has made the commitment.
Yep.
And the key is, you know, where it lands, but, and that's, you know, that's the communication piece that we like to talk about often here, you know, communication, and use any means, by any means, but to get it out there. But again, I want to thank you very much. And if anything hits us in the middle of the night or middle of the week, we'll see you again.
You know where I live.
All right, thank you all. Have a great.